It's time to present Scott duPont to bring you another episode of Finance Your Movie with tips and strategies to help you get your money to tell your story. It's time!
Excited to be back, especially today for another episode of Finance Your Movie. And the reason today is I'm really excited. It's very, very special. We have a very unique guest, Andy Olen, with the Sales Warrior Within podcast. Welcome, Andy.
Hey, Scott, it's great to be with you. Thanks so much for having me today.
The reason I said it was a little unusual is Andy is not coming on here with his years and years of film financing experience, but there's a term called benchmarking that I learned very early in my career, probably 40 years ago when I worked with Xerox. And what that means is if you're in the copier industry and you're trying to manufacture really high quality copiers or laser printers, you don't always want to study all the other laser printer and copier companies. Maybe you go over to Boeing Airlines and study their manufacturing process. Same thing with telecommunications and anything. So what we're going to, a unique chance today is to really get, I'm going to learn so much, a unique perspective that we've never had in this show. So Andy, let's go. I'm going to start with the first question for you. So many people, when they go to start raising money for a movie, it's a little bit different. It's a high risk investment. You're selling, but people don't like that word sales. It's like, oh, it's that icky feeling. Can you tell me about that?
Absolutely. In most of my sales trainings, I actually ask the participants who are sometimes salespeople, and I'll get one response from them. But often, if they're not salespeople, I'll ask that group of entrepreneurs, estheticians, whoever it may be, to raise their hand if they see themselves as a proud salesperson. And if I get like two hands up out of a group of 50 or 100, I'm surprised. Nobody wants to, Scott, to your point, think about themselves as a salesperson. And part of the reason that is actually comes back to Hollywood, to films. And what I share with the teams is look at the stereotypes out there that have branded or formed this idea, this negative connotation of salespeople. And I can think of a couple movies recently that are sort of rooted in longer term or historical stereotypes that I can touch on in a second. But a couple movies that come to mind: Glengarry Glen Ross with Alec Baldwin.
Yeah.
It's a great sales movie, and Alec Baldwin is like this heavy hitting sales guy who's over the top, and he's trying to motivate these other guys. And there's this very famous monologue out there, and he's just cracking the whip and hitting him hard across the face. And it's just not a pleasant experience. So why would you ever like a salesperson if it's going to be like Alec Baldwin in Glengarry Glen Ross? Then you sort of fast forward and you get to Chris Farley and Tommy Boy selling
Another
Sandusky
classic
auto part brake pads. And he is a buffoon. And it's that sort of that physical comedian that he was that, he was goofy. He was failing because he was so bad at doing it. And so, of course, we're not going to like salespeople. And then maybe even more recently, The Wolf of Wall Street, and you get Leonardo DiCaprio and his crew trying to con people into buying their fixed shares of whatever they were selling, whatever they were promoting. He and Matthew McConaughey have these wonderful conversations, and Jonah Hill. So movies actually really signal a preponderance of this negative sales stereotype that's out there. So that's one big reason. It's in our culture not to like salespeople. Second, it's in our history as well. So if you think back to some terms like the snake oil salesperson, hey, this is from many centuries ago, but I have a balm, I have a potion, I have a remedy that's going to help you cure all of your ills. Actually, during COVID, snake oil salesman connotations and terminology came back around again for all these different cures for COVID. And so, again, this is deeply rooted. And really what it comes back to, Scott, to put a finer point on it, is that what people protect most in their lives are their health and their money. And you can probably put family sort of inside of both of those as well, too, but health and money. So if I feel awkward talking to someone who's trying to sell me a financial solution or something that's very expensive, or a low skilled, low tenured salesperson who is giving me health advice. I'm really protective of that. And if I have a bad experience in that domain, it really paints this negative image in my mind for some time of sort of the yuck of dealing with salespeople. So that's really why, to answer your question, there's a lot of challenge for salespeople to step forward and take on some of those stereotype headwinds.
So one of the things that I'm gathering you do is you coach, you help empower people in all different industries on how to be better salespeople, how to get what they're trying to get. In our world, I tell most filmmakers, don't think of it as selling or even trying to sell somebody on a high risk independent film investment. Start with a killer business plan and share with a lot of people. So what are some of the tips, strategies, or advice you can give on what you would do to empower somebody doing sharing a film investment with different people?
Absolutely. And that's really the center of my belief, and also the podcast, The Sales Warrior Within, is that there's a salesperson within everyone. And through some basic, simple things that you can do, you can start to express that sales warrior within and really build your confidence and build your skills in selling very, very quickly, and overcome these stereotypes, and really create value for that producer, that company on the other side looking to make an investment in your movie. And so, a couple things. First off, I ask people, I'd ask your audience this as well, just as they're listening to this, to raise their hand if they're in a relationship of any kind. And of course, we all are in some sort of human relationship somewhere in our life. We may be a brother, a sister, a husband, a wife, a partner, a son, a daughter, a parent, whatever it may be. And so everyone's in relationships. And then I ask folks to think a little bit think about your best relationships in life and what makes those relationships work. And when people answer that, they talk about, hey, we're really good at how we communicate with one another. We have a lot in common with each other. And ultimately, trust builds and we can help each other solve problems. And right there, when people describe what makes their everyday relationships tick, I say, there you go. That's all it is between a salesperson and a customer as well.
The
You just have
trust, that rapport.
Absolutely. And really, it's that you can address an unmet need of your customer, or in this case, someone that's looking to invest in your movie. And you can create a great result for them through their investment. So they do see a pathway that, hey, if I make this investment in you, Scott, then, and in your film, that this is going to create a wonderful return, both in the millions of people that it makes it excited, or it teaches someone something, and certainly an economic return as well. So the first step, the first real basic thing, is for people to recognize that great sales skills are also the great skills that they've used to build relationships in their regular life. So, and in their personal life or in their business life. So if you apply the same principles of great relationship building from your personal life into how you do that with the person that you're pitching to or your customer, then all of a sudden, I think it demystifies selling quite a bit.
Very, very powerful. I would encourage everyone watching or listening to this podcast right now to replay that last 90 seconds that Andy just shared. It's so powerful what you just said, and so simple, but it's so powerful. I'm sure you've read that book, How to Win Friends and Influence People.
One of my favorites. I highly recommend it to everyone. Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. Yes.
I read it every year, and it
It's good.
just to reinforce what you just said in the last minute or so.
Yeah, and that's another great example. I teach and I share with people that I coach in sales and in business that simple habits, simple practices create big results. When you're selling, you don't have to worry about boiling the ocean. You just have to do a couple of simple things. And Carnegie in his book, one thing that that's always stuck with me is that, say your customer's name. There's nothing that sounds sweeter to someone's ear than the sound of their own name being said. So that's a simple thing. Smile. Right. There's part of it is being likable. Now, I always encourage people to be authentic and genuine, but go in excited. And that's probably tip number 2 here, is that there's a checklist that I recommend salespeople and business professionals follow when they're engaging with the folks sitting across the table listening to their pitch. And that acronym is POPs, POPS, and it stands for the following: preparation, optimism, passion, and self-awareness. So when you go in front of someone with your idea, be prepared, right? Don't just wing it. Now, you're the one who knows your movie and film better than anyone. You are the worldwide expert on your idea. That's fantastic. But have you practiced talking about it? Have you practiced your pitch? Have you practiced persuasion and bringing forward the best points? Prepare for each one of these pitches that you do. Prepare for that engagement or that sales engagement with your film, with your idea, with your movie. Optimism. People follow optimistic people. Hey, I am so excited about this. I'm very optimistic about what this film can do for the masses and what it can do for you. Passion. Show and demonstrate your passion for why you wrote it or why you're part of it, why you believe in this. Because if someone across the table is looking to make an investment, they want to believe in you. And so they're going to evaluate your conviction, your passion, your joy of what you're doing here and see if they can ride that train with you as well. And then self-awareness is, self-awareness for salespeople is talk about and pitch the things that you feel most comfortable with. If you're not deep financial expert or an economist, don't build your whole preparation just around the return on investment. Maybe you're more comfortable sharing the story of your idea, the narrative behind it, how it's going to connect with people, and you have just enough to get by on sort of the numbers of it, how much you need and how much of a return it will create. But figure out what you know best and focus most of your pitch and presentation on that. So again, POPs: preparation, optimism, passion, self-awareness, the salesperson's checklist.
I love that. Pops. I'm definitely going to remember that. And I think the optimism that you mentioned, the number 2, I think that's probably more important than ever today with all this negativity and toxic culture and social media, people piling on each other and the news and the politics. So I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah, well, thanks, and I agree with that. I think we are wired to connect with one another. We want to build bridges of connection. We seek to do that. That's how we solve problems together. As we do it in teams. What's the saying, or how does it go? I'll probably butcher it, but I'll try my best. Is that we can go fast alone, but you go farther together. I actually did that okay there. So people want to partner with one another. They want to connect, and so are they going to do that by listening to someone who's very negative? Or is their voice and their body language doesn't reflect that passion, that optimism? Probably not. So you got to bring your energy, your A game, even if you're not having a great day. Hey, when you have that 10, 15, 20 minutes in front of someone, you got to be on your A game. Just find a way to do it. Get into your happy place, because people will want to follow and engage with the optimistic pitch.
I think I talk a lot about that too, that if you're not like, and I don't mean like over the top crazy, but if you're not super, super excited, however you express that authentically, if you're not excited about your film and sharing that with someone else, a film investment is not something people need. There's no necessity here. And it's not, it's a crazy sell, because it's something that your enthusiasm has to spill over. And then a certain percentage of all the people out there are willing to take a risk, and then they do it. I wanted to, you mentioned just a few minutes ago, habits. I have a list of habits, and without telling you, I'd love to hear yours. I tell my clients, do these 3 or 4 things, even if you just take 5 or 10 minutes before you pick up the phone or before you get to a potential investor meeting. Are there certain habits that you do to get in a positive state and get that energy and enthusiasm?
Yeah, it comes back to the P and pops. It's part of that preparation cycle. One of the things, here's a very simple thing for your listeners that they can work on and really, I think, move quickly to master. In terms of preparation, toward right before I get on the call or I go into that office for that pitch, what I will do is I will rehearse 1 or 2, maybe 3 times my opening line, my first literal 4 seconds of what I'm going to say, when I meet you, Scott, who's going to be listening to my pitch, or whoever's across the table. And the reason why I focus on the first 4 seconds, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, 4, 1,000, is because in that amount of time, that's when the first and a very durable first impression is made. And all the brain is doing at that time when you meet someone for the first time is doing a quick evaluation. Hey, is Andy someone that I feel warmth towards, or there's a little bit of a chill here? It's a little bit cool. I want to ensure that my preparation and even getting that first line out, and the first line might be, hey, Scott, it's really nice to meet you. My name is Andy Olen. How are you? It might be that, but in that, right, there's a spring to my step, right? I'm
A
energized.
smile.
Yeah, I smiled. I said your name as well, back to some of the Carnegie best practices. But in that short amount of time, my hope is that the person across the table is making a warm first impression. So I try as a salesperson, as a business leader, and when I work with people, is to we go through, what is your opening line going to be? What are your first 4 seconds? And then interestingly, the other thing I like to do is, and I encourage your listeners to do this, is we actually share when we meet someone for the first time. So let's say this pitch for your listeners is in person. And so they go in, they meet someone for the first time, they go through their first 4 seconds. We as humans also have a custom, at least in North America and many parts of the world, to exchange something that I would argue is pretty intimate, and that's a handshake. We shake someone's hands. We're actually touching the other person. And so even in that short moment, as I'm saying my words and I'm shaking someone's hand, the first impression is being made. And so if my handshake is so strong and I'm hurting that person, they're not going to, exactly, they're going to pull back. They're not going to have that warm impression. If my handshake is too weak or limp wristed, it's going to be, a signal that maybe I don't have the strength to bring through a great product here in this pitch. But if my handshake's nice and neutral, not too strong, then I'm probably using body language signals in those first 4 seconds that amplify what I'm saying. So we're talking now for a few minutes about a very simple routine that we go through all the time. But for your listeners, have they ever asked anyone for feedback on their handshake? And so for your listeners today, this afternoon, this evening, this morning, whenever you're listening to this, ask a friend, significant other to say, hey, I'm going to shake your hand and just tell me what you experienced. Do you like it? Is it good? Because it's not a natural conversation to say, hey, Scott, nice to meet you. Your handshake
Yeah.
stinks. Right? We don't do
Yeah.
that. That's socially awkward.
Yeah. Ask
But
a spouse, a good friend, a
yes,
neighbor, somebody to kind of role play with you. So this is dialed in. This is so important.
exactly. One of a former colleague of mine when I was working in healthcare, Irfan, had a really weak handshake. And I gave him this feedback. And to this date, a decade later, he thanks me for that feedback. He's like, no one else told me. You're the only one who did it. It actually brought my confidence up. And I knew then I was doing it right. I didn't even know. And that's the same for most of us. So go ahead and ask for feedback on your handshake and give someone else feedback, and go into that next meeting having a wonderfully curated first 4 seconds and make that dynamite first impression.
Anybody listening to this right now, some of what Andy is sharing it sounds so simplistic and so basic, but it is so important because we all do the same thing. That first 4 or 5 seconds, we evaluate. It's like if you're meeting somebody for a date the first time, a lot of people in the first 5 seconds, like, oh, this is not going to be a good partner, whatever. So thanks for sharing all that. Moving on, do you have any specific activities or tips on how to get to yes, or when you're negotiating? So you've done the preparation, you've done the pops, you've done the handshake, the greeting. What are some of the kind of the next steps that can help people get to yes?
Yeah. So, a negotiation probably doesn't start within the first 5 to 10 minutes of a presentation or sharing your film, your idea. That comes a little bit later on. So let's sort of progress through what could be a scenario. You have your introduction, your first line, you make that great first impression. What I've liked to to watch and evaluate and share with other people is, if you want a little bit of good advice on your pitch and how to do that, watch a bunch of episodes of Shark Tank, because the entrepreneurs that are rolling out their products, and they do in the first 2 or 3 minutes, sort of a song and dance pitch, highlight, and they grab the shark's attention. They get them involved. They give them an example or a handout. And so I think that there's a lot of good learning in that. And then
Good and bad.
it can be good and bad. Yes.
Yeah, you learn
absolutely.
from the good and the bad.
Absolutely. And you're going to see both, and watch the shark's body language and how they react. And you're right. You said it earlier, Scott, and I completely agree. You have to be yourself in these situations. I am not going to go in there and do cartwheels and a backflip. That's not my authentic self, but I'm going to try through calm thoughtfulness, being well prepared, and being a subject matter expert. That's how I'm going to get them excited early on. So you have to be true to yourself. But then you were talking about negotiations. And in Shark Tank, what they get to very quickly is they get to a negotiation on a deal. And that probably has sort of varying amount of time before your listeners get to the negotiation. When you get to a negotiation, hopefully you've had an opportunity to build some rapport and trust. And if you have that trust, and my mom always gave me the definition of trust as being consistent and predictable. So if you've been consistent and predictable in your pitch, maybe your follow-up meetings, and you get to that point where you're trading, ideas and numbers now back and forth in a negotiation, let's assume the trust is there. I like to use in a negotiation, and what I teach teams on is a negotiation style called yes if negotiating. And yes if sounds like this. Yes, I will accept that amount of investment if I retain this much of decision-making authority.
Oh, I love it. I love it.
Yep. So what you want to do is think about a negotiation, which a lot of people are scared of. There's often a thought of conflict, chaos, and crisis in a negotiation, or someone's going to try to beat me down to the smallest amount and they're going to take over all the proceeds at the end, or somehow I'm going to get screwed in this. I don't want you to think about it that way. I want to think about how you can trade value back and forth. That if you're going to say yes to something, then what are you going to ask for in return? So I would ask and encourage your listeners to think about all the things that would make a great deal worth it to them. And if they get more money, what are they willing to give for a bigger investment? If they're going to get less, what are they willing to give? And they think about all these things. They prepare in advance for that negotiation, and they go in never having to say no, but rather they're going to say, yes, I can do that for you if you can also do something for me. And it's a back and forth cooperative negotiation. And if your listeners want to check it out, I do a 13-minute TED Talk on yes if negotiation. So Andy Olen on YouTube, Andy Olen TED Talk, and you'll find a 13-minute executive review and sort of fun overview of the yes if style of negotiating.
Awesome. We'll put that in the show notes and promote that as well. But I love that. It's so simple. Yes, if, and I can think of a very, very clear example. Like, let's say somebody comes in and says, okay, I'm going to write a 6-figure check. I want that executive producer title, but I also want my daughter to be in the film. Okay. So most independent filmmakers are not willing just to sell a part unless they've really, really vetted the acting skills, the resume, what the daughter can do. So maybe just quick thinking out here is like, yes, I'll take your big check and we can work your daughter into the film if we go into these parameters. We'll guarantee her a walk-on role, like a featured background, and we'll let her audition for 3 or 4 roles, and we'll see how it plans out.
Yeah, Scott, just listen to that. It's cooperative. You're agreeing to what the potential funder investor wants, and you're putting your conditions on how to make that happen. When people in a negotiation are asked to do something and they simply say yes, that's called acquiescence. It's giving in without protest. And the moment the person on the other side of the negotiation table hears acquiescence, ooh, Andy just said yes. He didn't ask for anything in a trade, I'm going to ask for something else. And maybe he'll just keep saying yes, and then something else and something else. And all of a sudden, you can walk away from that negotiation having given away a ton of stuff. You feel terrible about it, and you haven't gotten anything in return. So, yes, if is a way to confidently balance that negotiation back and forth. But you have to anticipate, one, what the investor might be bringing forward. And then two, you have to have trades that you are comfortable making. And your example is a perfect one. In a recent season of Curb Your Enthusiasm, one of my favorite shows, Larry David is producing a show, I think with Netflix or with someone, a streamer, maybe Hulu. And there's some fun negotiations that he goes through where he's really compromised by someone who actually wants his daughter in the show, and she's a terrible actress. And so that's an example of how not to negotiate, but that is a very real situation out there that I can certainly relate to.
Yeah, because both parties want to feel like they're getting something. They both want to feel good about the end deal. Andy, we're running a little bit over time. Is there any way I can bring you right back after a quick break?
Absolutely.